Between 1875 and 1895, when Lowell still appeared in industrial newspapers and Protestant sermons as proof that factory labor could be both efficient and moral, the city woke before the sun. Streets nearest the canals remained slick with night moisture, and the air carried the mixed odors of raw southern cotton, packed tight in rail-shipped bales, and cold canal water drawn from the Merrimack River to drive the mills. The machinery had not yet begun to turn, but the system was already in motion. For Mary O'Donnell, as for hundreds of women like her, the workday began not at a loom, but at the mill gate, where a single sheet of paper, tacked up before dawn, quietly decided who would earn wages and who would not. Mary had arrived in Lowell young, in her late teens, part of the steady influx of Irish Catholic women who, by the 1870s, increasingly replaced the earlier generation of native-born operatives as wages stagnated and hours lengthened. She came with expectations shaped by reputation rather than experience. The mills promised regular employment, cash wages counted weekly, and a measure of independence unknown in domestic service. At first, those promises seemed intact. She worked 10 or 11 hours a day, 6 days a week, tending power looms that demanded constant vigilance, mending broken threads, correcting tension, and keeping pace with machines driven by overhead shafting and leather belts. She learned to move swiftly through narrow aisles and to keep her frames running when permitted. At night, she returned to a boarding house room shared with another woman, its cost deducted automatically from her pay. She was exhausted, but aware that her labor produced something tangible. Each week she entered her earnings, several dollars in good periods, into a small notebook, subtracting board, laundry, and church dues, and allowing herself to imagine a future not entirely ruled by immediate need. That sense of regularity did not last. As the decade wore on, work became erratic. Mill operations rose and fell with national markets. Overproduction, repairs, labor disputes, or slack demand brought reduced hours or abrupt stoppages. Belts snapped, spindles wore down, and management responded with the same impersonal solution each time. Partial shutdowns announced without warning. Mary learned to recognize the signs before reaching the gate. The unnatural quiet in stairwells, the clusters of women waiting without conversation. When her room number failed to appear, the day became an unpaid interval. The time was technically hers, yet without wages it held no value. It was not rest, not leisure, but suspension. At the boarding house, life continued with disciplined calm. The matron, approved by the corporation, enforced curfews, regulated meals, and kept accounts with careful neutrality, in keeping with a system long promoted by mill owners as evidence of moral order. Mrs. Haskell, who managed Mary's house, asked no questions about absences. The notice at the gate explained enough. Meals were adjusted to attendance, arrears recorded without comment. Some women filled the empty hours sewing or repairing clothes already thinned by factory work. Others read newspapers or wrote letters that would travel slowly to Ireland or to relatives in other American cities. Mary often sat by the window, darning stockings and calculating how long her savings could absorb another lost day. Uncertainty spread outward, shaping choices that once seemed personal. Sunday conversations, held in the public rooms when visitors were allowed, became tentative. Plans were framed in conditions rather than commitments. Mary watched acquaintances marry quickly, drawn less by affection than by the promise of a husband's steadier wage from skilled or semi-skilled trades. Others remained in the mills into their 30s, taking pride in earnings that grew less predictable with each year. Mary stood between these paths, aware that each carried its own cost. Supervisors spoke in the language of efficiency and output, treating the posted notice as a neutral administrative tool. For Mary, it governed nearly everything. Its presence or absence shaped her confidence, her willingness to plan, her sense of permanence. There were stretches when her room appeared day after day, wages resumed, and stability briefly returned. There were also longer periods of exclusion, when independence eroded not through personal failure, but through a labor system that depended on women's flexibility to absorb economic shock. The change in Mary was gradual but lasting. She became cautious in expectation, restrained in commitment, attentive to the smallest signals of disruption. Pride no longer meant uninterrupted employment. It meant maintaining self-respect amid uncertainty. When she eventually left mill work to marry a man with a modest but reliable income, the choice did not feel like retreat. It closed a chapter defined less by decision than by contingency. On her final morning at the gate, the notice hung as it always had. Her room was listed, the looms ready, the day fully accounted for. She watched the line of women step forward, then turned away. The paper would be posted again tomorrow, and the next day, and Lowell would continue to celebrate its order and discipline. For Mary, the notice no longer measured the value of her time. She left carrying not only years of labor, but the hard-earned endurance of someone who had lived where the future was decided at dawn, and who, within those limits, had still managed to choose her own ending. If this story resonated with you, please consider liking the video. It helps ensure that these quiet, often forgotten stories continue to be shared. Subscribe to Ordinary Lives, Extraordinary Times to stay connected to stories of everyday people who lived through moments that shaped history. Each life mattered. Each story deserves to be remembered. We also invite you to leave a comment and tell us where you're watching from. Our viewers come from many places and generations, connected by a shared respect for history and the lives that lived it. Thank you for watching, and thank you for helping keep these stories alive.